Welcome to our deep dive today. You shared this really fascinating material with us.
Yeah.
A series of responses from an AI chatbot about education. And,
Yeah.
I know an AI might seem like an unconventional place to start,
Hmm.
but I think its insights spark some really thought-provoking questions about the future of learning
Yeah.
and, frankly, the future of society as a whole.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
It's interesting how we often box in the idea of education.
Mhm.
We think classrooms, teachers, textbooks.
Right.
But using an AI allows us to step back from those things and examine the underlying concepts in a whole new light.
Exactly. And what really jumped out at me was this connection the AI makes between virtue
Yeah.
and quality education. And, that's not something we typically think about
Right.
when we think about traditional learning.
It's not a usual pairing,
Yeah.
and the AI defines virtue as
Yeah.
good characteristics in the human mind,
Okay.
which, might sound a bit philosophical at first glance.
Right.
But when you break it down, those characteristics like honesty, kindness,
Yeah.
patience, compassion, they're essential for a well-functioning society.
Totally. It's like the difference between individual success and collective well-being.
Yes,
If everyone's just looking out for themselves, things can get pretty chaotic.
absolutely.
But if you have these virtues as the foundation for how people interact with each other, it creates a much more cooperative and harmonious environment.
Right, and that's where the AI's perspective gets really interesting,
Okay.
because it goes on to argue that a lack of virtue
Mm-hmm.
is actually a major contributing factor to some of the biggest problems we see in the world today.
Wow.
Things like conflict, social unrest, even political polarization.
So it's not saying that a lack of virtue is the only cause,
No, not at all.
but that it's like a missing piece.
Yeah, a missing piece of the puzzle.
Okay, I like that.
And, the AI makes this point that at the end of the day,
Yeah.
human behavior stems from our thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
right? And those thoughts are shaped by the virtues or the lack of virtues that we cultivate within ourselves.
Yeah, I see.
So think about it. If we're constantly surrounded by negativity, by people who are always putting their own self-interest above all else,
Yeah.
it's going to be harder to hold on to those virtues.
Right. It's like that saying, you are what you eat.
Exactly.
But for the mind, you become what you're constantly exposed to.
Right.
Which makes me wonder about your own thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Considering your own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like the world is becoming less virtuous?
That's a very complex question.
Yeah.
And I think the AI's point about how our environment shapes our thinking is spot on.
Okay.
We live in a world where we're just constantly bombarded with information, and a lot of it is negative. It's on the news, it's on social media,
Everywhere.
and it's so easy to get swept up in all of that negativity.
Right.
But the AI's point is that we're not powerless in this.
Okay.
We can actively choose to cultivate those virtues within ourselves,
Right.
even when it feels like the world around us is pushing us in the opposite direction.
So it's about taking a stand against that negativity.
Exactly.
Not by ignoring it, but by consciously choosing a different path.
I love how you put that.
Okay.
And that's precisely where education comes into play.
Okay.
The AI really emphasizes that education is more than just acquiring knowledge or skills.
Mm-hmm.
It's about character development.
Right.
It's about instilling those ethical principles that will enable individuals to flourish within a society.
Okay. So it's about raising good humans, not just good test takers.
Exactly.
But here's the thing. Virtue can feel like this really abstract concept.
Yeah,
So how do we actually teach that?
that's the question.
What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, the AI uses this really powerful analogy.
Okay.
It compares education to a factory producing quality individuals.
Oh, wow.
And those individuals will then go out and contribute to a better society.
Okay.
Now, that analogy might sound a bit impersonal at first,
I can see.
but I think it really highlights how important it is to be intentional with education. We need to think carefully about what kind of products we are creating.
I like that. A factory for good humans.
Yeah.
But factories can sometimes churn out really uniform products.
Yeah.
So doesn't that kind of go against the idea of recognizing each individual's unique strengths?
You've hit on a really important point, and it's actually something the AI addresses a bit later.
Okay.
So remember, we're just in the beginning of this deep dive.
Yeah.
But even at this early stage, it's making us question those assumptions we have about education.
Right.
What it is, what it should be, what role it plays in creating the kind of world we want to live in.
And that's why these AI-generated insights are so interesting.
Definitely.
They challenge us to think differently, to step outside of those conventional boxes.
Absolutely.
So we've established that virtue is important,
Mm-hmm.
and that education plays a key role in cultivating it.
Yeah.
But let's get real for a second.
Okay.
We all know the world can be a tough place.
You can?
With all sorts of pressures and temptations that make it really hard to stay true to those virtues.
Absolutely. That's actually where the AI goes next. It delves into the challenges,
Okay.
both the internal and external challenges that can make it difficult for people to fully embody and express their virtues.
Interesting. So how does it frame that?
Well, it's like this. Think about it like you're trying to grow this beautiful garden.
Right.
You've carefully planted the seeds, you're nurturing them with water and sunlight,
Mm-hmm.
but the soil itself is contaminated.
Okay.
So no matter how hard you try, those plants are not going to thrive.
I see.
And that's really the challenge the AI is highlighting here.
Okay.
Even if we're working on cultivating those inner virtues,
Yeah.
the honesty, the compassion, the integrity,
Mm-hmm.
the environment we're in can make it so difficult to actually put those virtues into practice.
So it's not just about individual effort.
Right.
It's also about the system itself, the societal soil, if you will.
Precisely. And the AI specifically talks about how these external pressures,
Things like economic inequality, political corruption, the constant bombardment of consumerism, they create this climate where it almost feels like those virtues are a disadvantage.
it's like you're being told to play by the rules,
Mm-hmm.
but then you see other people getting ahead by bending or breaking those rules.
Exactly.
It can make you question the whole system.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've seen examples of this in your own work.
Oh, absolutely. We see it all the time. People facing these ethical dilemmas at work,
Mm-hmm.
feeling pressured to compromise their values in order to get ahead.
Right. Or think about social media.
Oh, yeah.
It can be such a breeding ground for negativity and comparison,
It really can.
which makes it so much harder to maintain that sense of genuine connection and empathy.
It's like that whole fake it till you make it mentality
Yeah,
can actually end up eroding the very virtues we're talking about.
it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we navigate that tension?
Right.
How do we hold on to those values when the world around us seems to be pushing us in a completely different direction?
That's the big question.
It is. And this is where I think the AI's perspective gets really powerful.
Okay.
Because it suggests that even small acts of virtue,
Mm-hmm.
those seemingly insignificant choices we make every day,
Yeah.
they can actually have a ripple effect.
Wait, are you talking about that story I told you about my building and the recycling bins?
Exactly. You decided to start separating your trash.
Yeah.
And it sparked a conversation with your neighbors.
It did.
And pretty soon they were doing it too.
Mm-hmm.
And then it caught the attention of the building management.
Yeah.
That one small action, driven by your own sense of responsibility,
Right.
led to a systemic change.
It's funny how those things happen.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to start some kind of movement or anything. I just
Right.
thought it was the right thing to do.
Exactly.
But it shows that even when we feel powerless against these big issues,
Mm-hmm.
we can still make a difference in our own little corner of the world.
Absolutely. And those little corners can add up. You know,
Right.
if we each focus on expressing those virtues in our daily lives,
Yeah.
being honest in our interactions, showing kindness to strangers, standing up for what we believe in,
Mm-hmm.
it creates a shift in the collective consciousness.
So it's like we're each planting these seeds of virtue.
I love that analogy.
And those seeds can grow into something much bigger than ourselves.
They really can.
Ah.
But let's be realistic here.
Okay.
We're not going to transform the world overnight.
Right.
There's still those systemic issues, the poverty, the corruption, the
Yeah,
inequality.
those things don't just disappear.
Exactly. And the AI is not suggesting that individual virtue alone will solve all the world's problems,
Okay.
but it's saying that those individual acts of virtue are essential for creating the kind of society where those systemic changes are even possible.
So it's like building a foundation.
Yes.
You need those strong individual blocks of virtue to support the larger structure of a just and equitable society.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Right.
And this is where the AI circles back to the importance of quality education.
Okay.
It sees education as this key tool for not only cultivating those individual virtues, but also for equipping people with the knowledge and skills they need to actually create those systemic changes.
So it's about empowering people to be both virtuous and effective agents of change.
Precisely. Think about it, an education that focuses on critical thinking, problem-solving collaboration.
Yeah.
those are the skills that people need to challenge the status quo, to come up with innovative solutions, to work together to build a better world.
It makes me think back to my own education.
Yeah.
I definitely had some amazing teachers who really fostered those skills, who encouraged us to question things, to think outside the box.
That's great.
But I also had some who were very much stuck in that traditional rote learning approach.
Right, and that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
The AI is very clear about the critical role that educators play.
Okay.
They're not just transmitters of knowledge.
Right.
They are cultivators of character. They're the ones who can create those learning environments where students feel safe to explore, to question, to develop those virtues that will serve them well throughout their lives.
So it's not just about what we teach, but also how we teach it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to a really interesting point that the AI makes
Okay.
about the difference between quality education and quality of education.
Yeah. What exactly did it mean by that?
Yeah. I have to admit that distinction between quality education and quality education, it kind of threw me for a loop.
It is a subtle difference, but I think it really gets to the heart of how we think about education on these different scales. When we talk about quality education in like a broad sense, we're often looking at the overall health of the education system as a whole.
Right.
Things like funding curriculum, standards, teacher training.
Yeah.
It's almost like assessing the health of an entire forest.
Okay.
Are the trees generally healthy? Is there enough sunlight reaching the forest floor? Are there invasive species disrupting the ecosystem? So quality education is about the big picture.
Exactly. The systemic level.
Okay.
Whereas quality of education is more often used to evaluate a specific school or program.
Right.
You might say, this school has a high quality of education because they have great teachers, a supportive learning environment, students who are engaged and achieving at a high level.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that the entire education system in that region is thriving.
So it's like saying a particular tree is healthy and bearing good fruit. But that doesn't tell us the overall health of the orchard.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if we sometimes get too focused on those individual trees, those test scores, those rankings.
Yeah.
And we lose sight of the bigger picture.
It's a valid concern, and I think the AI is really prompting us to consider both.
Okay.
We need to make sure that individual schools are providing a high quality of education, but we also need to address those systemic issues that might be preventing the entire forest from flourishing.
Right. And it sounds like the AI is arguing that cultivating virtue is essential for both.
I think so.
We need individuals who are not only well-educated, but also ethically grounded.
Yeah.
Who are going to use their knowledge and skills to actually make the world a better place.
Precisely. And that brings us back to this idea of personal action. The AI's message here is both empowering and challenging.
Okay.
It's telling us that we're not powerless in the face of these big, complex problems.
Right.
We can start by embodying those virtues in our own lives.
Yeah.
Making those conscious choices that reflect our values and inspiring those around us to do the same.
It's like we each have a responsibility to be the change we want to see in the world.
I think that's a great way to put it.
It makes me think about all those people throughout history who have fought for social justice, for equality, for a better world.
Yeah.
They didn't wait for permission or for someone else to fix things. They took action.
Absolutely.
Even when it was risky, even when it felt like an uphill battle.
Right. And they often started with those small acts of courage, of compassion, of speaking truth to power. And those acts created ripples that eventually grew into waves.
Wow.
Transforming societies and leaving the world a better place than they found it.
That's pretty inspiring when you think about it that way.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we all have the potential to be part of something so much bigger than ourselves.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
And that's really what I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive today.
Yeah.
The AI's insights might have come from an unconventional source.
Right.
But they ultimately lead us back to this really timeless truth.
Okay.
The power of human virtue to shape the world around us.
Well said. It has been an incredible journey exploring these ideas with you and to all of our listeners out there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing this fascinating material with us.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope this deep dive has given you some new perspectives to ponder.
Yes.
Maybe even some inspiration to take action. Remember, even small ripples can create big waves.
They can.
So go out there and make some ripples.